I found 2 pieces of bran cake in a dry bucket. I was ecstatic. The husks in the cake were coarse and thick, but luckily, the bucket didn't have much slop in it. The cakes weren't soaked through. They were actually relatively clean. I brushed off a couple of stray vegetable leaves and ignored the stench rising from the bucket. I started stuffing the food into my mouth. It was cold and rough. Without water, it was incredibly hard to swallow. I didn't care. I forced the first cake down in a few huge bites. It got stuck in my throat, scratching the skin and making me gasp for air. I nearly choked, but I finally forced it down. My stomach stopped cramping, but I still felt empty. I had been in this world for 2 days. This was my first meal. As I caught my breath, I noticed a 10-year-old beggar boy watching me. He looked pathetic. He stared at the remaining bran cake in my hand with a mix of hunger and jealousy. I looked at his thin, weak frame, then back at my food. I hesitated for a second. Then, I shoved the rest of the cake toward my own mouth. I wasn't going to share. I had crossed over into this ancient-looking world only to find that my modern knowledge was useless. I could barely survive myself. I didn't have the luxury of pitying a stranger. Just as I was about to bite down, the boy's face twisted with rage. He lunged. He jumped nearly 2 feet into the air, reaching for the cake with both hands. His mouth was open, revealing yellowed teeth as he tried to sink them into my forearm. I panicked for a split second, then I saw red. Back in my own world, I wasn't a huge success, but I never went hungry. Now, I was stuck in this hellhole with nothing, and even a little brat thought he could push me around. All my pent-up frustration found a target. I swung my arm hard. My new body was about 14 or 15 years old. I wasn't tall, but I was much stronger than a starving street kid. My forearm slammed into his face. Blood sprayed from his nose, but the kid was tougher than I expected. He didn't fly back. Instead, he grabbed my arm and bit down hard. His expression didn't change. He didn't even flinch. His eyes were locked on that bran cake the entire time. The pain flared through my arm. "You little animal. I'll kill you," I screamed. I brought my knee up with everything I had, slamming it into his chest. He lost his grip and flew backward, hitting the filthy ground several feet away. I wasn't finished. I stepped forward and kicked him twice in the ribs, sending him sliding another few yards. Blood leaked from his mouth. He was definitely injured. I turned to leave, but I felt a chill. I looked back and saw the boy staring at me with pure, poisonous hatred. It made my skin crawl. I was new here. I had no power and no background. The last thing I needed was an enemy, even if it was just a beggar. Who knew if he belonged to some local gang? A dark thought crossed my mind. We were in a narrow, dark alley. No one was around. If I killed him now, nobody would find out for hours. And even if they did, who would care about a dead beggar? In a lawless place like Yinqing, the poor died every day. The authorities didn't have the time or the will to care. My eyes drifted to a heavy cobblestone near the wall. It was smooth and hard, definitely harder than the kid's skull. The misery of the last 2 days boiled over. My modern morals crumbled under the weight of my survival instinct. My face must have looked terrifying because the boy's eyes finally filled with fear. I had seen enough violence in this city to know the truth. This was a world that ate people alive. Why should I play by the old rules? I walked toward the stone. The boy began to tremble. Suddenly, 2 servants from a wealthy estate appeared at the mouth of the alley, carrying a large slop bucket. My heart rate slowed. Logic rushed back, and the monster inside me retreated. The opportunity was gone. Part of me felt disappointed, but another part felt a strange sense of relief. I shook my head and walked out of the alley. The main street was packed. People were sprinting past me, shouting to each other. "Hurry up. The Tiansha gang is hiring. If we're late, we'll miss our chance." I had heard that name constantly over the last 2 days. The Tiansha gang was the top power in Yinqing. In many ways, they were more powerful than the local government. They were also famous for being ruthless. I followed the crowd. A job meant money. Money meant clean food. It meant I wouldn't have to fight beggars for scraps in a bucket. I fought my way through the sea of people until I reached a wall with a posted notice. The characters looked like traditional Chinese. I couldn't read them perfectly, but I got the gist. The Tiansha gang was looking for kids between 7 and 12 years old to learn martial arts. They promised that these kids would become the core of the gang. The families of those chosen would get a huge reward, and the kids would have a bright future. I sighed. My hope vanished. They weren't hiring workers. They were recruiting disciples. And I was too old. This body was at least 14. I turned to push my way out of the crowd, but a thunderous voice stopped me in my tracks. "You there? Kid, hold on a second." I froze. I knew they were talking to me. I didn't think he was talking to me. I kept moving, pushing through the crowd to get away. "Kid," I said, "stop." The voice boomed again, sharper and more annoyed. "Are you deaf? Does my name, Goyi, mean nothing in Yinching anymore?" I froze. I was new here and had to be careful. The last thing I wanted was to offend someone powerful before I even had a place to sleep. I slowly turned around to see who was shouting. A man stood there with a thin, wispy mustache and a crooked, arrogant posture. He looked like a typical street thug. Behind him stood two massive brutes. All three wore the uniform of the Tiansha gang. My stomach dropped. I had no idea how I'd managed to offend this Goyi, but I knew I was in trouble. Back on Earth, I had been an ordinary salesman. I hadn't made a fortune, but I'd learned how to read people. I knew how to talk to saints and how to lie to devils. I immediately wiped the tension from my face and replaced it with a humble, admiring smile. I jogged over to him, bowing low. "Goyi," I said, my voice dripping with forced respect. "You called for me? How can I help you, sir?" I hated acting like a coward, but in a world without laws, survival came first. You were either a dragon crossing the river or a fool looking for a grave. I wasn't a dragon yet, and I certainly didn't want to be a dead fool. Goyi seemed pleased by my submissive attitude. The anger left his face. He looked me up and down, his eyes narrowing. "You can read, can't you?" I blinked, surprised. I hadn't realized that was what caught his eye. He must have watched me earlier when I was studying the recruitment notice. There was no one there to explain the text, yet I had looked at it and walked away disappointed. It was a smart observation. My mind raced. Should I lie? No, this guy was sharper than he looked. If I tried to trick him now, I'd pay for it later. I bowed even deeper, my smile growing wider. "You have a sharp eye, Goyi," I flattered. "I attended a private school for a few years when I was a child. I know a few characters." The lie came out smoothly. He couldn't possibly check my background in a place like this. Goyi nodded, and for the first time, I saw a hint of approval in his gaze. He looked at me like he'd found a rare prize. Most scholars he met were arrogant and looked down on gang members, even when they were starving. Finding someone who could read and knew how to show respect made him feel important. He puffed out his chest, leaning into his role as a big shot. "How old are you?" 16, I lied. I was actually younger, but I didn't want to look too weak. "Name?" "Song 1. "And how do you make a living?" he asked, probing further. "I write letters for people. I improvised. It brings in a few coins, just enough to keep me from starving." He asked a few more questions about my family. I told him a sob story about a fallen household and dead parents. I was a man with no ties and nowhere to go. "Fine," Goyi said, slapping a hand on my shoulder. "Follow me from now on. I'll introduce you to the Tiansha gang. You'll get a salary of 1 silvertael a month." 1 silvertael. In this world, that was enough to feed a whole family for a month. It was a massive offer for someone in my position, but I felt a flicker of hesitation. Why was a thug being so nice to a stranger? "What's the matter?" Goya's voice turned cold. "You think you're too good for the Tiansha gang?" "No, not at all, Goyi," I stammered, raising my hands. "It's just, my learning is shallow. I'm afraid I'll mess up your important business." "If I'm not worried, why are you?" he snapped. "Don't be ungrateful." The threat was clear. I had to accept. I forced a look of overwhelming gratitude into my eyes, as if he were my long-lost father. "Thank you, Goyi. Thank you for the opportunity. I'll do anything for you. I'll go through fire and water." The worship in my eyes made him swell with pride. He reached into the coat of one of his henchmen and pulled out half a greasy pancake. "You look like you're about to faint," he said, tossing it to me. "I didn't finish this for breakfast. Take it." "Thank you, Goyi." I caught it and began wolfing it down. I was genuinely hungry, but I also wanted to keep feeding his ego. As I chewed, I realized something. If a high-ranking member was saving half-eaten pancakes, the gang might not be as rich as they claimed. Still, it was my best shot. They probably wouldn't send a scholar to the front lines to die. It was a job, food, and protection. Yi finished his business at the recruitment wall and led me away. We walked through the winding streets of Yinqing until we reached a massive complex. The security was tight, with guards everywhere. We twisted through a maze of hallways until we reached a row of quiet rooms. Yi stopped in front of an old man and bowed. Elder Yin, I found a new recruit. He's a scholar. He can read. Elder Yin looked to be over 50, an ancient age in a world this brutal. His eyes were cloudy as he looked me over. Without a word, he tossed a small booklet at me. Read it, he commanded. I caught it. This was the interview. I opened the book and began to read the classic lines of the 1,000-character classic. The sky is dark, the earth is yellow, the universe is vast and boundless. I didn't get far before he held up a hand. That's enough. Elder Yin turned to Yi and nodded slowly. Your luck is good today. Elder Jiin has been recruiting literate young men lately. This kid is a perfect fit, Hang said, rubbing his hands together. He looked stiff and awkward, offering a forced smile. Elder Yin, I heard the elder is offering a reward for scholars. You see, Elder Yin chuckled. You're well-informed, kid. I thought you just got lucky, but it seems you came prepared. Go to the accounting office and claim your 10 taels of silver. Thank you, Elder Yin. Hang bowed low, his face full of greasy flattery. I stood to the side, feeling a cold knot form in my stomach. 10 taels of silver? In Yinqing, that was enough to buy 2 pretty servant girls. I realized then that I hadn't been recruited. I had been sold. I'd spent the morning thinking I was playing Hang for a fool, but the fool was me. As Hang turned to leave, I grabbed onto the last shred of hope I had. Hang, you said you'd take me to eat and drink the best food. Hang glanced back at me. His eyes were cold, filled with nothing but mockery and disdain. He didn't say a word. He just turned and vanished through the door. A street rat like him couldn't give you anything. Elder Yan's voice cracked behind me like a whip. Being sent to Elder Jiin is an opportunity people beg for. It's an immortal fate. Don't be ungrateful. Before I could respond, 2 massive guards stepped into the room. They had long steel blades at their waists. One of them drew his sword halfway, the cold light of the blade making my eyes sting. Be smart, kid, the guard growled. Don't try anything. Fury and resentment boiled inside me. Immortal fate? If this was such a blessing, they wouldn't need to kidnap and force people into it. But looking at the sharp steel, I had to swallow my pride. In this world, the weak were just toys for the strong. I clenched my fists so hard my knuckles turned white and followed the guards out. We walked for 15 minutes, reaching a secluded corner of the Tiansha gang's headquarters. It was a private courtyard nestled against a mountain. Over 100 guards armed with crossbows and blades stood watch. They were tall, silent, and intimidating. Inside the courtyard, there were rows of guest rooms. Behind them, at the foot of the mountain, stood a lonely 2-story building surrounded by neatly organized garden plots. I saw strange, nameless herbs growing there. Pick an empty room and stay inside, one guard ordered. Meals will be delivered 3 times a day. Do not step outside until you are called. He stared at me, waiting for me to move. I didn't argue. I picked a room and walked in. It was basic, a table, a chair, and a bed. I shut the door and caught a glimpse of the guards leaving. They weren't worried about me running. With the level of security outside, there was nowhere to go. Once I was alone, my face twisted with rage. The Tiansha gang was powerful, and I was nothing. I felt like a fish on a chopping block. I needed power. Back at the tea house, I'd heard stories of warriors who could run on walls and fly over rooftops. I wished I was one of them. I wished I could slaughter this entire gang. I was locked in that room for 7 days. For the first 2 days, I paced like a caged animal, hating my helplessness. But the food was actually good, plenty of meat and vegetables. By the 3rd day, I forced myself to calm down. I realized this isolation was a tactic. They wanted to break our spirits and make us accept our reality. On the 8th day, a shout echoed through the courtyard. Everyone out. Move fast or be punished. I opened my door and stepped out. About 100 other teenagers were standing in the yard, looking just as nervous and thin as I was. Most were locals, whispering in hushed, angry tones about the Tiansha gang. They were furious, but they were terrified. Suddenly, a pampered-looking fat kid in expensive silk robes started screaming. How dare the Tiansha gang kidnap me? My father is Zhang Er, the magistrate of Qingyuan County. Send me back this instant. He was loud. Everyone turned to look. Qingyuan County was nearby, and a magistrate held real power. I wondered if the gang had made a mistake or if the kid was just a delusional brat. The guards looked hesitant for a second, but they didn't move. They had clearly heard his, "Do you know who my father is?" speech before. Then, a man in his 40s with a thin mustache stepped out from behind the guards. He looked annoyed. He raised his right hand, holding a slip of yellow paper between his fingers. "Go," he muttered. The paper burst into ash. Suddenly, a fireball the size of a human head materialized in the air. The heat was terrifying, making the air around it warp and shimmer. With a violent whistle, it streaked across the yard. The fat kid's eyes widened with pure terror. He didn't even have time to turn around before the fireball slammed into his chest. The impact sent his heavy body flying into the air. He didn't even hit the ground before the flames engulfed him, and his screams turned into a shrill, agonizing wail. The fat kid didn't even hit the ground before he turned into a human torch. A sickening crackle filled the air, the sound of rendering fat and burning flesh. Within seconds, a foul, heavy stench blanketed the yard. It only took a dozen breaths. A living, breathing person was gone, replaced by a pile of gray ash. Not even a fragment of bone remained. Silence fell over the yard. The 100 or so teenagers stood frozen, their faces drained of color. I was just as terrified as the rest of them. My mind raced. This Tiansha gang was bolder than I thought, killing the son of a magistrate in broad daylight. They clearly didn't care about the government or the lives of 100 kids. But more than that, I was staring at the man with the mustache. He hadn't used a hidden blade or martial arts. He had used a slip of paper to summon fire. This wasn't something a warrior could do. This was the power of an immortal from the legends of my old world. Was I in a world of cultivators? "He's an immortal," a boy in patched clothes suddenly screamed. He collapsed to his knees, his face a mix of pure terror and desperate longing. An immortal! That cry broke the spell. One by one, the others dropped to the ground, bowing and trembling. The man's ruthless display had crushed any thought of resistance. I followed suit, dropping to my knees with the crowd. My heart was pounding like a drum. This was real power. It was leagues beyond any wandering swordsman or martial artist. I stared at the ash on the ground, my resolve hardening. I had been treated like trash since I arrived here. If I wanted to stop being a pawn, I needed that power. I had to become a cultivator. The guards looked just as shaken as we were, their eyes filled with awe and fear. The man with the mustache, the immortal, let out a thin, satisfied smile. He had achieved exactly what he wanted. He looked down at us like we were ants, his gaze cold and superior. "I am a cultivator," he announced, his voice carrying across the yard. "My name is Master Jean. I practice the righteous path of Tao, so you have nothing to fear. I brought you here to grant you a great destiny, a chance at immortality." He paused, letting the words sink in. "For the next month, I will personally teach you a cultivation technique called the longevity art. Anyone who can successfully sense the world's energy and draw it into their body within 30 days will become my personal disciple. Cherish this chance. Even if you don't reach immortality, you will gain power and wealth beyond your wildest dreams." The crowd erupted. The fear was gone, replaced by burning greed and excitement. Everyone looked at Master Jean like he was a god. I felt the excitement too, but a small voice in the back of my head whispered a warning. It felt too easy. Jean was a master of manipulation. First, he struck us with a heavy stick to break our spirits, and now he was offering a sweet date to win us over. Why would a powerful immortal give away his secrets to a bunch of starving kids for free? There had to be a catch. This destiny felt more like a trap. Master Jean didn't wait. He sat us down and began explaining the first level of the longevity art. He taught us how to steady our hearts, clear our minds, and focus our breathing. He was surprisingly patient, explaining every word and sharing his own insights. Most of the kids here could read, a rarity in this kingdom, and they hung on to his every word. Some were so impatient they immediately crossed their legs and closed their eyes, trying to feel the energy in the air. I didn't rush. I knew that sharpening the axe was more important than the chopping. I listened intently, memorizing everything. After 2 hours, Jean stood up. That is enough for today. You must meditate and understand. For the next month, you are forbidden from leaving this estate, but you may move freely within the walls. Meals will be provided. Do not disappoint me." He turned and walked toward a 2-story building at the base of the mountain. As soon as he left, the guards handed out small booklets containing the first level of the technique. The other kids scrambled back to their rooms, desperate to start. Some huddled in groups, whispering about their progress. I didn't join them. I spent the afternoon exploring the estate. It was massive, built right into the mountainside. Our living quarters were just a small part of it. Behind the rooms was a wide, open area with ponds and trees, and further back sat Jean's private house, surrounded by fields of strange herbs. I eventually went back to my room. A meal was waiting on the table, 3 white flour buns, and a plate of stir-fried vegetables with actual bits of meat. In this world, that was a feast. Most commoners never saw meat. The better they treated us, the more uneasy I felt. A dark shadow seemed to hang over the entire place. I sat down, picked up the small booklet, and looked at the 100 or so words that made up the first level of the longevity art. Whatever Jean was planning, I needed to be ready. I started to read. The text in the booklet was incredibly cryptic. If Jean hadn't explained the basics earlier, I probably would have spent months just trying to figure out what the words meant. It took me nearly an hour of intense focus just to memorize those 100 or so jagged, awkward characters. Once the words were locked in my mind, I sat cross-legged on my bed. I closed my eyes, cleared my head, and tried to sense the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. Time slipped away. 2 hours passed, then 3. I felt nothing. No energy, no warmth, just the silence of the room. I started to panic. Did I have no talent for this? Was I just an ordinary person destined to fail? Jean had mentioned that not everyone was cut out for cultivation. He said people with the right roots were 1 in 100. Even among those, talent varied wildly. He hadn't gone into much detail, almost as if his own knowledge on the subject was limited. Feeling dejected, I pushed open my door. It was evening now. The sky was a brilliant, bleeding gold, painted by the setting sun. It was beautiful, but I was in too much danger to appreciate the view. I walked out into the courtyard and saw the other kids gathered in small circles. They were all whispering about their progress. I moved from group to group, listening quietly. After a full lap, I realized something that made my heart stop racing. Out of these 100 people, not a single one had sensed any energy. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. It turned out immortality wasn't that easy to achieve. After a quick dinner, I went straight back to my room. I meditated until the early hours of the morning, but still, nothing happened. I finally collapsed into bed and fell asleep. The next morning, Jean appeared outside our rooms exactly on time. He asked if anyone had sensed energy yet. When no one spoke up, he didn't seem disappointed. He just started his lecture again, patiently explaining the key points of the longevity art. By the 3rd night, everything changed. I was deep in meditation when I suddenly saw them. Countless tiny, shimmering specks of light were floating all around me. They drifted aimlessly in the air like glowing dust. My exhaustion vanished instantly. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had done it. I had passed the first hurdle. I actually had the talent to become an immortal. I forced myself to calm down. I couldn't let excitement ruin my focus. I tried to take it a step further, attempting to pull those lights into my body. But no matter how hard I tried, the specks ignored me. They wouldn't budge. After 15 minutes of struggling, a cold thought struck me. I stopped. I couldn't do this too fast. At the very least, I couldn't be the first one to succeed. Until I knew exactly why Jean was teaching us these secrets, I had to keep my head down. The next morning, Jean asked the same question. Did anyone sense the energy yesterday? Again, silence. Jean's eyes scanned the crowd, and for a moment, he looked genuinely disappointed. It had been 3 days, and he thought we were all failures. I kept my face blank, blending into the crowd. I knew I was better than the rest of them, but I wasn't going to let him know that. That night, I decided to push just a little further. I managed to draw a single strand of energy into my body. It felt like a faint, lukewarm current trickling through my veins. It followed the path described in the longevity art, circulating slowly. My eyes snapped open. I wanted to keep going, but another bad thought entered my mind. What if Jean could sense my cultivation level just by looking at me? If he found out I had succeeded and was hiding it, he might kill me. I cut off the technique immediately. The energy I hadn't refined yet leaked out of my pores and vanished back into the air. That was close. I decided right then that I would stop practicing for the next few days. I just had to act like I was trying. For days passed. On the 7th morning, I walked out of my room to find a massive commotion. A group of kids was surrounding a boy named Yahello. He was a skinny, dark-skinned kid from a farming village, looking awkward and red-faced as everyone cheered. Yahello, did you really do it? Someone shouted. Teach us. How did you get the energy inside? Yahello looked like he wanted to bolt. He wasn't used to being the center of attention. He stammered, his face turning a deep shade of crimson. What is this noise? A harsh voice cut through the air. Jean was walking toward us, his face twisted in anger. Why are you shouting instead of practicing? The courtyard went silent. Everyone bowed their heads in fear. Because Yahello was standing in the middle, Jean's gaze landed right on him. Yahello started shaking. He later told me it felt like being stared down by a wolf in the woods. Sir, Yahello whispered. I managed to draw the energy in last night. What? Jean's anger vanished instantly, replaced by pure joy. He lunged forward and grabbed Yahello's wrist. After a few seconds, he let out a loud laugh. Well done. From today on, you are my top disciple. After today's lesson, move your things into my private building. I will teach you personally. Yahello's eyes lit up. He looked like he had just been told he was the king of the world. Thank you, Master Jean. Don't call me Master Jean, he said with a warm, fake smile. Call me Master. Jean turned to the rest of us. Let this be a lesson. Work hard, and you can be like Yahello. Now, Yahello, come sit by me. As Jean started his lecture, I sat in the back, my mind racing. I had learned 3 very important things today. First, Jean had no idea who had talent and who didn't. He was just throwing a wide net and hoping to catch something. Second, he couldn't sense our power from a distance. He had to touch us to know for sure. And third, he called Yahello his first disciple. But I remembered the conversation between old Kai and the guard. This wasn't the first time Jean had brought kids here. So what happened to the first disciples from the groups before us? The answer chilled me to the bone. Was it possible that not a single person from the previous groups had succeeded? If they had, where were they now? And what happened to the ones who failed? These questions haunted me. I felt like a sharp sword was hanging over my neck, ready to drop at any second. The only comfort I had was knowing Jean couldn't sense my power from a distance. I could keep practicing in secret. 20 days passed in a flash. Another young man named Zhang Cheng managed to draw energy into his body. Jean was ecstatic. To him, finding 2 talented people out of 100 was a massive stroke of luck. It was far beyond his expectations. During this time, I kept my head down and continued my cultivation. The warm current inside me grew stronger every day. My strength, stamina, and mental clarity reached levels I never thought possible. My mind felt sharper, and my thoughts were faster. I kept a close eye on Yahello, too. He was a simple guy and didn't see any reason to hide his progress. He loved showing off. Just yesterday, I saw him lift a 100-pound boulder with one hand while the other kids cheered in envy. I quietly gauged my own strength. I knew I was stronger than him. My power definitely exceeded 100 pounds. I also noticed that Jean hadn't done anything suspicious to the successful disciples yet. That gave me a small sense of relief, but I didn't let my guard down. Every evening after dinner, I took a walk along the edges of the compound. People got used to seeing me wander alone, so they stopped paying attention. I wasn't just walking for exercise, though. I was scouting. I needed an escape plan. The compound walls were over 10 feet high, too tall to climb easily. Plus, there were guards posted everywhere. Escaping over the wall without being seen was nearly impossible. But after a month of searching, I found something. Hidden behind some thick shrubs and tall weeds about 100 yards from the dorms, there was a small hole in the base of the wall. It was just big enough for a person to crawl through. It was incredibly well hidden. If I hadn't been looking specifically for a way out, I never would have found it. Still, there were guards nearby, and the hole led straight into the heart of the Tiansha gang's territory. I needed the perfect moment to use it. One afternoon, a crowd of kids gathered around Yahello and Zhang Cheng, begging for tips on how to succeed. There were only 3 days left in the month, and everyone was getting desperate. They didn't want to lose their chance at becoming immortals. Ernyo and Zhang Cheng tried to help, but talent isn't something you can just explain. I stood near a large tree, watching the commotion, when I overheard two guards leaning against the wall nearby. "Look at those fools," one guard sneered, his voice full of mockery. "They have no idea they're walking straight to their deaths." The other guard sighed. "They're just kids, 14 or 15 years old. They don't understand how cruel the world is. There's no such thing as a free lunch." My blood ran cold. My hair stood on end. It didn't matter if we succeeded or failed. Death was waiting for all of us. I realized then why Jean couldn't let anyone leave. Everyone here had learned the longevity art. Even if they failed to draw energy, they knew the secrets of the technique. If they were let go, the art would spread, and Jean would have rivals. He wasn't about to let anyone threaten his power in Yinqing. I crept away before the guards noticed me. I had to make a move. If I didn't succeed soon, I'd be killed with the rest of the failures. But based on what I saw, the successful ones were safe, at least for a little while longer. The next morning, I stood with the others in the clearing. Jean arrived late, flanked by Ernyo and Zhang Cheng. When I looked at Ernyo, I nearly gasped. He looked terrible. His steps were shaky, his spirit seemed drained, and his skin was sagging. It was like he had aged 30 years overnight. The vibrant teenager was gone, replaced by a man who looked ancient and frail. His face had an unnatural, sickly flush, like someone who had taken too much medicine while their body was too weak to handle it. What had Jean done to him? Was it a mistake in his training, or something much darker? I didn't have time to figure it out. I had to stick to my plan. I stepped forward and bowed deeply. "Master Jean, I managed to draw the energy in last night." Jean's eyes flared with a golden light. He lunged forward and grabbed my wrist. I felt a surge of heat rush into my body. It was the same spiritual energy I had been cultivating, but much more massive and overwhelming. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had been practicing for over 20 days. My energy was far more developed than a beginner should be. I was terrified he would realize I'd been lying. Fortunately, Jean didn't check too closely. He felt the presence of spiritual energy and immediately pulled back. He was likely afraid that his own massive power would crush the fragile energy of a new disciple. He looked at me with genuine approval. "Very good. What is your name?" "Songwon," I replied. "From today on, Songwon, you are my third disciple. Go, sit with your senior brothers." "Thank you, master." I sat down next to Zhang Cheng. Both he and Ernyo gave me friendly nods. They were just kids from small villages, unaware of the trap we were all sitting in. As I sat there, I looked at Ernyo's withered face and knew one thing for certain. I had to get out of here before I ended up like him. These kids were simple. They hadn't been poisoned by the world yet. Zhang Cheng and Ernyo were honest, rural boys who treated me with genuine kindness from the moment I joined them. Jean wrapped up his lecture after about an hour. Usually, he only spent 15 minutes talking before losing interest, but since I had successfully drawn energy today, he put on a bit of a show. It was clear he didn't expect much from the other students left in the wings. "Songwon," Jean said, turning toward the small wooden building at the foot of the mountain. "Follow me." Zhang Cheng, Ernyo, and I hurried after him. I could feel the burning gazes of the other students hitting my back. They were jealous. To them, I had just hit the lottery. "Senior brothers," I whispered as we walked. "I'll be relying on your guidance from now on." We reached the small building. It was a simple structure, but the atmosphere was heavy. "Songwon, you will stay in the empty room on the first floor," Jean commanded. "Cultivate diligently. If you have questions, you may seek guidance." He paused, his eyes landing on the eldest boy. "Ernyo, come with me to the second floor." The first floor was for disciples. The second floor was Jean's private sanctum. No one was allowed up there without his express permission. "Yes, master," we replied in unison, bowing low. As Ernyo followed Jean upstairs, Zhang Cheng turned to me with a smile. "Come on, junior brother. I'll show you to your room." "Thank you, second senior brother." There were only 3 rooms on the ground floor. Ernyo and Zhang Cheng had the first 2, leaving me the one right next to the staircase. Once we were inside, my mind started racing. I had 1,000 questions about Jean's habits and schedule. If I wanted to escape this place alive, I needed to know everything about him. but I kept my mouth shut. This building was made of thin wood. The soundproofing was non-existent. If I spoke too loudly, Jean would hear every word from the floor above. Besides, Jean was a cultivator. His senses were far sharper than a normal person's. If I started prying and Zhang Cheng got suspicious, he might report me. I couldn't take that risk. I needed a better source of information. Ernyo was the eldest and had been with Jean the longest. He was also blunt and slow-witted. He was my best target, especially given how strange he looked today. Second brother, I said, keeping my voice casual. What are those fields outside the building? Those are Master's spirit herbs, Zhang Cheng explained. He uses them to make medicines that can boost our cultivation. I saw a cave at the foot of the mountain earlier, I added. The one with the stone door. That's not just a cave. That's Master's alchemy grotto. He refines his pills there. Zhang Cheng's expression turned serious. Listen to me, Song 1. The herb fields, the grotto, and especially the second floor, they are strictly forbidden. Do not go near them without Master's permission. I understand. Thank you for the warning. I didn't push further. I wanted Jean, who I assumed was eavesdropping, to think I was just another obedient, hard-working kid. After Zhang Cheng left, I went straight to my bed and pretended to focus entirely on my cultivation. Life in the building was isolated. Jean didn't ask us to do chores or run errands. He just wanted us to grow stronger. 3 days passed in a flash. The 1-month deadline for the other students had finally arrived. That morning, I got up to head to the lecture hall for the usual morning lesson. Ernyo stopped me at the door. Junior brother, Master told me to tell you and Zhang Cheng that you don't need to go to the hall anymore. I narrowed my eyes and looked toward the distant buildings where the other 100 students lived. Usually, the place was buzzing with activity. Today, it was deathly silent. Not a soul was in sight. Where is everyone? I asked. Master sent them away, Ernyo said simply. They didn't have the immortal fate. Since they couldn't draw energy into their bodies, there was no point in them staying. A sudden, violent chill surged up my spine, hitting the top of my skull. I actually shivered. Sent away? I didn't believe that for a second. 100 young men don't just vanish. They hadn't been sent home, they had been erased. I forced a tight smile onto my face. Thanks for letting me know, big brother. Save me a walk. I felt sick. My stomach churned with a mix of disgust and pure terror. I couldn't stay in that house for another minute. I needed to get away from Jean, even if only for a few 100 yards, just to breathe. The air is nice this morning, I said. I think I'll take a walk in the courtyard. I'll go with you, Ernyo offered. I've been stuck upstairs cultivating for days. I'm bored. We walked out together. I started chatting with him, asking about his family. He didn't suspect a thing. He told me everything. He was from a tiny, dirt-poor village. He had 5 siblings. He'd been hunting and farming since he was 8 just to keep his family from starving. He'd only learned to read because a local teacher took pity on him. Once we were far enough away from the building, I changed the subject. Big brother, you've been training the longest. Your cultivation must be the highest among us. Where are you at now? Ernyo hesitated for a second, then leaned in. I'm already at the late stage of the first level of chi refining. I stopped dead, staring at him in total shock. I knew my talent was better than his, and I wasn't even at the middle stage yet. How was he already at the late stage? It was impossible. How are you so fast? I whispered. Ernyo looked around nervously to make sure we were alone. Master told me not to tell you guys. He refined a special pill called the blood chi pill. It boosts your cultivation at an incredible speed. I only took one, and I jumped from the early stage straight to the late stage. The blood chi pill. I remembered how sickly he looked 3 days ago. Are there side effects? I asked. My blood and energy felt completely drained, Ernyo admitted. The day I took it, I felt like I had aged 50 years in a second. But Master has been giving me lots of tonic herbs lately. I feel much better now. Master is truly amazing. He looked toward the building with pure reverence. He told me that once I hit the 2nd level, he'll make me a hall master in the Tiansha gang. I'll earn hundreds of silver taels a month. My family will never be hungry again. I looked at Ernyo's face. He was beaming with hope, dreaming of a future that I knew would never come. Physically, he looked healthy again, but the memory of his withered, gray face haunted me. Jean wasn't teaching us. He was fattening us up for something. I wasn't a doctor. I didn't know how to read a pulse or diagnose internal damage, so I couldn't see exactly what was rotting inside Ernyo. But I wasn't an idiot, either. I had been wary of Jean from the start, and I knew nothing in this world was free. If the blood-chi pill didn't have a horrific catch, Jean wouldn't be handing them out like candy. Suddenly, a cold realization hit me. It all clicked. Jean wasn't just fattening us up, he was using us as human test subjects. The previous disciples hadn't graduated. They had likely died from the pills or were discarded once they lost their utility. That explained the constant recruitment. It explained why the previous groups vanished without a trace. It explained why the Tiansha gang guards looked at us with such pity and fear. Panic flared in my chest. Ernyo started his medication, only 20 days after successfully sensing chi. That meant my clock was ticking faster than I thought. I needed Ernyo and the others to survive as long as possible. They were my shield. If they stayed alive, I had a window to escape. Back in my room, I realized I couldn't just sit and wait for death. I had to take the initiative. I needed to learn Jean's schedule. When did he sleep? Did he even sleep at all? For the last 3 days, he had stayed on the second floor of the small building, hidden away. I walked to the stairs, my heart hammering against my ribs. I took a deep breath, steadied my nerves, and climbed up. As I reached the second floor, I took the opportunity to scout the terrain. The building was built right against the mountain. To the west was a sheer cliff, dozens of feet high. It was smooth stone, completely bare of plants, and impossible to climb. Above that cliff, the mountain rose hundreds of feet higher, thick with jagged rocks and dense forest. Jean was sitting on a prayer mat, holding a weathered book. I kept my eyes low, making sure not to look too suspicious. I walked toward him and bowed deeply. "Disciple greets master," I said, my voice steady despite the fear. Jean nodded. "Sit. Tell me, what issues are you having with your cultivation?" "Master, I feel like my progress is stagnant," I lied, though I used a real sensation I'd experienced. When I guide the spiritual energy into my meridians and toward my dantian, only a tiny fraction stays. Most of it just leaks away. Jean didn't answer immediately. Instead, he tested my understanding of how chi interacts with the blood. I spent 15 minutes listening to his explanation, acting like a confused student. Through his guidance, I actually learned where I had been making mistakes. When I stood up to leave, I stole a glance at the book in his lap. Since I was standing right in front of him, I could clearly see the title, Detailed Guide to Growing Low-Level Spirit Herbs. It looked old, maybe only a few dozen pages long. Jean caught me looking. My heart skipped a beat. Was I being too obvious? "Interested in this?" he asked. He didn't seem angry. In fact, he looked indifferent. "Here, have a look if you want." He handed me the book. I flipped to a page featuring a plant called Crimson Blood Vine. It was a climbing vine that loved warmth and light, but hated water and cold. "What do you think about growing this?" Jean asked. In my past life, I worked in sales for a traditional Chinese medicine company. I knew a thing or two about botany. I thought for a moment, trying to sound useful. If I could prove I had value beyond being a lab rat, maybe he wouldn't kill me. "I think it should be planted on a sunny slope, far from any water source," I said. "The soil needs to be soft and sandy to allow for drainage after rain. And since our winters are harsh, we'd need to find a way to keep it warm during the frost." Jean's eyes flickered with a sudden, sharp interest. He nodded slowly. "I didn't expect much from your cultivation talent, but you seem to have a gift for spirit plants." He went quiet, deep in thought. Jean had been stuck at the 3rd level of chi refining for years. The first 3 levels are just the beginning, where a cultivator is barely different from a mortal. But the 4th level? That's where the real power begins. He had 2 spells that required him to be at the 4th level to even cast them. More importantly, he practiced the longevity art. It wasn't great for fighting, but it had one legendary trait. It extended your life. A normal cultivator at the chi refining stage might live to 120, but there were stories of a man who reached the 9th level and lived to be 180. Jean was desperate. He knew he'd never reach the foundation establishment stage, but if he could just hit the 4th level, he could live long enough to see the 6th, or even the 7th. The blood chi pill was his only hope. It was a dangerous drug used by desperate, low-talent cultivators to force a breakthrough by burning their own potential. Jean had spent 2 years figuring out how to refine it based on a recipe he found in a dead man's cave, but he was terrified to take it himself. He needed to know exactly how it affected the body first. He needed to see someone else survive it before he risked his own life. And that was exactly why we were here. Jean was a self-taught fraud. He had stumbled into cultivation by luck, finding some ancient scrolls on spirit plants, but he had never met another cultivator in his life. Everything he knew was the result of blind guesswork. The blood-chi pills he produced looked nothing like the descriptions in his stolen recipes. He was too terrified to take them himself, so he had devised a simple, cruel solution: human experimentation. Over the past year, 7 disciples had died by his hand. They all followed the same pattern. After taking the pill, their vitality would drain away, their organs would wither and age at an impossible speed, and they would drop dead within days. Enro was the first one to survive. He was Jean's first glimmer of hope, the proof that his formula was finally stabilizing. Usually, Jean handled the gardening and alchemy alone. It was exhausting work that ate into his meditation time. But after seeing my talent for identifying sick plants, he saw an opportunity. He wanted a dedicated servant to handle the manual labor so he could focus entirely on perfecting the blood-chi pill. With Enro's success, he felt he was on the verge of a breakthrough and didn't want to waste another second pulling weeds. He pointed toward the eastern fields. The red mustard and salt flowers over there are secondary ingredients. You can find them in any deep mountain around Yen City. They aren't worth much, so I'll let you practice on them. It was a test. Jean's promises of rewards were nothing but a lie to keep me motivated. In his mind, allowing me to live a few years longer as his gardener was the greatest mercy he could offer. "Thank you, master," I said, bowing low to hide the coldness in my eyes. "I will give my all to ensure the harvest is perfect." I took the manual from his hand and left the second floor. As I walked away, I felt a heavy weight in my chest. I wasn't sure if taking this job was a blessing or a curse. Maybe if I made myself useful enough in the fields, I could delay the day he forced me to swallow one of those lethal pills. Back in my room, I pored over the notes. Jean only grew 8 types of spirit plants, all of them specifically for the blood-chi pill. I cross-referenced his personal scribbles with the more detailed, low-level spirit plant guide I had found. I needed to know these plants better than he did. The next morning, I headed to the eastern field. It was a small plot, about half an acre, neatly divided into rows of 30 red mustard and 30 salt flowers. Jean had kept it in decent shape. I spent the day meticulously inspecting every single leaf, pulling tiny weeds, and numbering each plant. I started a logbook, recording the growth rate and water intake of every individual sprout. 10 days later, Jean emerged from his tower. He had been watching me. Satisfied with my obsession with detail, he handed over the keys to the entire plantation. He was going back into seclusion to refine a new batch of pills. "Look after the red blood vine," he warned, his voice trembling with a mix of greed and anxiety. "If anything happens to it, your life is forfeit." The red blood vine was the core ingredient. Jean had used the entire power of the Tiansha gang to scour the country just to find this 150-year-old specimen. He only dared to snip tiny pieces of its branches for his alchemy, terrified of killing the source. Once Jean disappeared into his alchemy cave and slammed the stone door shut, my heart began to race. Enro had told me that these sessions lasted at least 10 days. This was my window. This was my chance to escape. I hurried to the small wooden shack in the fields where the tools were kept. I tore the place apart, looking for anything that could help me climb or fight. Most of it was just standard farm equipment, but then, hidden under a pile of burlap, I found it. A 20-centimeter dagger. I pulled it from its leather sheath. The blade was a dull, matte black, but the edge caught the light with a terrifying, icy sharpness. I gripped the hilt and swung it at a thick wooden post. It sliced through the inch-thick wood like it was air. My eyes widened. This wasn't a tool, it was a masterpiece. A weapon. I tucked the dagger into my boot and stepped outside, slinging a hoe over my shoulder to maintain appearances. While I pretended to work, I scanned the perimeter. The valley was a cage. The cliffs were 5 stories high at their lowest point, sheer stone covered in slick, wet moss. There were no trees to climb, no ropes to be found. I thought about asking Ernyo or Zhang Chung for help, but I immediately dismissed it. They looked at Jean like he was a god. If I mentioned escaping, they'd probably drag me to him themselves to earn a reward. I felt a surge of panic. The opportunity was right in front of me, but I was trapped by the geography. My hand slipped, and my hoe nearly sliced through a precious salt flower. I froze, taking a deep breath. I couldn't afford to be reckless. Patience was the only thing that would keep me alive. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced my room before creeping outside into the cool night air. The moon was bright, casting long shadows across the silent courtyard. I stared up at the cliffs, searching for a weakness, when I saw it. A flicker of orange light at the very top of the mountain. Someone was up there. My heart sank. If there was a campfire, there were guards. It made sense. The Tiansha gang ran this place like a fortress. They had walls around the outer perimeter and heavy patrols. Why wouldn't they have a lookout on the highest point? It wasn't just to keep us in. It was to watch the roads for any army coming to shut them down. The mountain path was a death trap. With my current strength, I was barely stronger than a normal person. I couldn't sneak past trained killers and martial arts experts in the dark. Defeated, I retreated to my room. I didn't try to sleep. Instead, I sat cross-legged and began to circulate my energy. If I couldn't find a way out through luck, I would have to grow strong enough to cut my way out. Days bled into weeks. I spent every waking hour tending the fields and every night pushing my cultivation to the limit. My hard work finally paid off. Through constant, secret cultivation, my strength reached the middle stage of the first level of chi refining. I felt the power humming beneath my skin, but I kept my head down. One afternoon, while I was working in the medical field, the heavy stone door of the alchemy cave creaked open. Jean stepped out. He looked smug, radiating an air of success. My heart skipped a beat. A cold wave of dread washed over me. He was finished with his seclusion. That meant a new round of pill testing was about to begin. I wondered who he would pick this time. Would it be me? Jean walked over to the spirit fields to inspect my work. He looked at the lush herbs and nodded with a fake smile. He told me I was doing a great job and to keep it up. After a few empty words of encouragement, he hurried away. He had more important things on his mind. This time, his refinement process had gone perfectly. He had managed to produce 2 pills from a single furnace, a personal record. He was convinced he had finally perfected the blood chi pill. He was certain these were the real deal. Ernyo, Zhang Chung, Jean shouted, his voice echoing through the courtyard. Both of you, come to the second floor. I have something special for you. He didn't wait for an answer. He just turned and headed upstairs. Zhang Chung didn't hesitate. He burst out of his room and sprinted toward the stairs. He was excited. He thought the master was finally rewarding him. Jean had promised that once he reached the second level of chi refining, he could go home to visit his family. Zhang Chung probably imagined himself returning as a hero, draped in silk with pockets full of silver. He ran toward his own destruction with a smile on his face. Ernyo was slower. When he opened his door, his face was pale and hesitant. He remembered the last time he took a pill. It had increased his strength, but it had nearly killed him. If Jean hadn't fed him massive amounts of supplements afterward, Ernyo knew he wouldn't have lasted 3 days. It hadn't even been a month, and now he had to take another one. He didn't want to, but Ernyo was honest and simple. He couldn't imagine that the man he viewed as a second father would actually hurt him. Eventually, he followed Zhang Chung up the stairs. Inside the room, Jean held out the pills. He told them these would boost their cultivation and promised to protect them while they absorbed the power. Zhang Chung thanked him profusely and swallowed the pill instantly. Ernyo hesitated for a moment, but he lacked the courage to say no. He swallowed his, too. Within minutes, steam began to rise from their heads. Their faces twisted in agony. Jean barked at them to stay focused. He warned them that if they stopped now, their cultivation would collapse. They bit their tongues and endured it. Their body temperatures soared. Their skin turned a deep, angry red, like boiled shrimp. Jean watched, his eyes narrowing. Something was wrong. Suddenly, Ernyo let out a blood-curdling scream. He collapsed, his body twitching violently on the floor. A second later, Zhang Chung fell beside him, unconscious. How can this be? Jean hissed. He looked panicked and frustrated. I could sense the spiritual energy inside them exploding out of control. Their cultivation was rising, yes, but it was burning through their life essence to do it. The blood chi pill was doing exactly what it always did, consuming the host to fuel the fire. But this time, the drain was even faster. Since they were unconscious and couldn't direct the energy, the power began to leak out of their bodies. The air in the room grew thick with wasted spiritual pressure. I watched from the fields as their bodies withered before my eyes. Their skin sagged and deep wrinkles carved into their faces. Ernyo, who had taken the pill twice now, even started developing age spots. They were dying. Jean's expression turned hideous. He had failed again. Worse, he had lost 2 test subjects at once. He muttered to himself that he should have only used one. He didn't care about their lives. He only regretted the waste of resources. He composed himself, his eyes turning cold and murderous. He decided he would have to use the other kid outside next. He wanted to wait longer, but he was out of options. He also needed to start looking for new children soon. He couldn't afford to run out of subjects again. Jean stepped out onto the balcony. I was looking up, and for a split second, our eyes met. It felt like being stared down by a starving predator. My skin crawled. I knew right then, the 2 boys were gone, and I was next. I quickly looked away and went back to my hoeing, pretending I hadn't seen anything. I spent the rest of the day watching that second floor. I prayed to see Ernyo or Zhangcheng walk down those stairs. But the sun began to set, and the balcony remained silent. At dusk, 2 thugs from the Tiansha gang went up. They came back down carrying 2 heavy burlap sacks slung over their shoulders. They carried them out of the courtyard like they were hauling trash. My heart sank. They were dead. That night, I couldn't sleep. The walls felt like they were closing in. The next morning, Jean found me. He told me he was going back into seclusion to refine more pills and ordered me to take care of the fields. I bowed and watched him go. As soon as he was out of sight, my blood began to boil with a mix of terror and adrenaline. I knew this was it. I had 10 days while he was busy in that cave. This was my last chance to escape. I couldn't sit around waiting to be stuffed into a burlap sack. I went to the tool shed and grabbed a heavy cleaver. I found 4 small trees growing far from the main wall where the guards couldn't see me easily. My plan was simple. Cut them down tonight, lash them together, and make a ladder to scale the cliffs at the back of the mountain. I was alone in the courtyard now. The guards stayed on the outer perimeter. As long as I was quiet, they wouldn't notice. Besides, I wasn't the weak kid I used to be. With my mid-stage cultivation, I was faster and stronger than ever. It was time to go. I felt ready. Everything was prepared, and I just needed the sun to go down so I could make my move. But then, the courtyard gate creaked open. 4 thugs from the Tiansha gang marched in. They didn't just pass through, they moved into the small building. 2 of them took up positions right outside my door, arms crossed, swords at their waists. I stood frozen in the middle of my room. My heart hammered against my ribs. Did Jean know? Had I slipped up? I replayed every move I'd made, every word I'd said. I had been perfect. There was no way I had exposed myself. I paced the floor, trapped like a caged animal. I realized then that Jean wasn't necessarily onto my escape plan. He was just a paranoid, careful man. He probably didn't want me sneaking onto the second floor while he was busy, but his caution had effectively killed my only chance. The next few days were a blur of anxiety. I watched the guards through the gaps in the door. Every time I thought about making a break for it, I saw the sunlight glinting off their steel blades. I wasn't strong enough to take on 4 armed killers at once. The courtyard grew busy again. More young men were brought in, locked away in the side rooms. They were fresh meat, waiting for Jean to emerge and teach them. 10 days passed. Jean finally stepped out of his seclusion, looking more energetic than ever. He had a glow about him that made my stomach churn. He looked at me and smiled. "Song 1, he said. "Follow me to the second floor." My blood ran cold. I didn't want to go, but I had no choice. I followed him up the stairs, my legs feeling heavy. Once inside, he held out a pill. It was dark and smelled of bitter herbs. "Eat this," Jean commanded. "It will boost your cultivation. Once you reach the second level, you'll become a core member of the Tiansha gang. You'll be free to come and go as you please." He was lying. I knew it. The mask of the obedient student finally cracked. I stared at him with pure hatred. I wanted to bury my fist in his smiling face, but I knew I'd be dead before I landed a hit. If I angered him, he'd turn me into a human torch with one of those yellow talismans. Being weak is a sin. I understood that now more than ever. Jean's smile turned into a cold sneer. So, there's a smart one among my disciples after all. You've guessed the truth, haven't you? He didn't seem bothered. Don't resist. Take the pill. If you survive, I'll truly give you your freedom. He reached into his robe and tossed a metal token onto the floor. It clattered at my feet. That is my personal command token. With this, no one in the Tiansha gang will stop you. I looked at the token, then at the pill. I was trapped. If I didn't take it, he'd kill me now. If I did, I might have a chance. I remembered Ernyo. He had survived the first time. I reached out and took the pill. Then I picked up the token. I hope you keep your word, Master, I said, my voice rasping. Jean nodded. I always do. You've seen the new recruits. If you survive this, I won't need you for testing anymore. You can just look after my fields. I didn't believe him for a second. I sat cross-legged on the floor and swallowed the pill. Immediately, a wave of heat exploded in my stomach. It felt like I'd swallowed molten lead. The heat rushed through my veins, burning everything in its path. My body began to consume itself. My blood and essence were being sucked dry to fuel the transformation. I could feel the color draining from my face. The heat was being refined by my longevity art, turning into spiritual energy and settling in my dantian. My power was growing, but my body was failing. I felt hollow, like I was being aged 50 years in a matter of minutes. My vision blurred. I wanted to collapse. Don't lie down. Jean's voice boomed in my ear. If you stop now, the medicine will swallow your life force even faster. You'll die? I gritted my teeth. I pushed through the exhaustion, forcing the energy to circulate. Just as I felt my very last drop of essence was about to vanish, something strange happened. Deep inside my body, a hidden reservoir of energy snapped open. It was sudden and powerful, triggered by the extreme pressure. It felt like a dormant part of my soul had finally woken up. I used this new surge of power to finish refining the pill's energy. Jean was watching me, his eyes wide with excitement. I wasn't turning into an old man like the others. I was holding on. It's working, he whispered. The medicinal path is working. After an hour, the heat faded. I opened my eyes, feeling like a ghost. Before I could even breathe, Jean's hand blurred. He shoved a second, smaller black pill into my mouth. Don't worry, he said smoothly. That's just the 7-day heartbreaking pill. As long as you take the antidote every week, it won't hurt you. I was too weak to fight back. The poison was down my throat. He had me on a leash now. I managed to stand up, leaning against the wall for support. My legs were shaking so hard I could barely walk. I felt like I'd been run over by a carriage. I stumbled back to my room and collapsed onto the bed. I thought about that mysterious energy that had saved me. Without it, I would have ended up in a burlap sack like Zhang Cheng. I searched my body, trying to find where it came from, but it was gone. Over the next 2 days, my treatment changed. The guards brought me expensive meals, ginseng, herbs, and blood-replenishing soups. By the 3rd morning, most of my strength had returned, though I still felt a bit hollow in the gut. I got up early. I looked at the command token sitting on the table. Jean gave me this to keep me obedient, but I planned to use it. It was time to see exactly what lay outside these walls. I had been trapped in that courtyard for 2 long months. It was finally time to see what lay beyond those walls. As I stepped out of my room, I saw over 100 teenagers gathered in the wing area. Boys and girls, all of them looking anxious and hopeful. I couldn't help but sigh. Why did I have to transmigrate into a world where human rights didn't even exist? I tried to slip past them toward the main gate, but a voice stopped me cold. Song 1. Where are you going? It was Jean. He was standing there, getting ready to give his usual lecture on the longevity art to the new recruits. I cursed my luck. Why did I have to run into him first thing in the morning? Since he held my life in his hands, I didn't have much of a choice. I walked over and bowed respectfully. Master, I was planning to take a walk outside, I said. Jean nodded, wearing a mask of kindness. He turned to the crowd of young faces and raised his voice. Everyone look. This is Song 1, my top disciple. He has been training with me for 2 months. If you work hard, you can be just like him. You will learn immortal arts. You will have wealth, status, and power. His speech was moving. I could see the fire in the kids' eyes. They were hooked. I, on the other hand, was just annoyed. I had become Jean's favorite prop for brainwashing. Come, Jean said, looking at me. Say a few words to your new brothers and sisters. I didn't want to, but I valued my life. I forced a warm, enthusiastic smile onto my face. Listen to the master, I told them. If you succeed in sensing the energy, you'll be like a carp leaping through the dragon's gate. This is the best chance you'll ever have to change your destiny. Don't waste it. Inside, I was apologizing to them. I was sorry, but if they succeeded quickly, it meant Jean would be less likely to use me for his next medical experiment. Jean looked satisfied. Well said. Take the token I gave you to the treasury. You can withdraw 500 taels of silver every month. I bowed again. Thank you, master. I'll be going now. With that token in hand, nobody blocked my way. In fact, most of the guards treated me with newfound respect. After asking for directions, I made my way to the heaven-shaking gang's treasury. I had no intention of saving the money. I withdrew the maximum amount, 400 tael notes, 9 10-tael notes, and the rest in loose silver. 500 taels was a fortune. In this country, a single tael could support a family of 3 for an entire month. With a heavy purse and a lighter heart, I finally walked out of the sect's headquarters. The streets of Yen City were bustling. People were everywhere, and the air was filled with the smell of street food. Since I had started my cultivation, my appetite had become massive. I wandered the stalls, buying snacks and watching street performers I'd never seen in my previous life. When I saw something I liked, I tossed a bit of silver to the performers. It felt good to be a person again. I spent the whole morning wandering, covering almost half the city. But I wasn't just playing. I was secretly marking the locations of the biggest medical clinics. I needed to find someone who could tell me about the 7-day heartbreaking pill. I didn't rush in. I spent hours making sure I wasn't being followed. Jean had let me out quite easily, which made me suspicious. Once I was absolutely sure there was no tail, I stepped into a clinic called Xinglin Hall. I asked for a doctor named Xue Tao. He was a famous miracle worker in Yen City, known for treating rare illnesses. He was also incredibly greedy. I had to pay 10 taels of silver just for a consultation, with no guarantee of a cure. Dr. Xue, I said when I finally saw him, I've been poisoned. I need you to help me clear it. The old man nodded and told me to offer my left hand. He checked my pulse for a long time, his brow furrowing. Then he checked my right hand. He looked at my tongue and the whites of my eyes. From what I can see, you've recently lost a massive amount of essence and blood, he said. Your qi is weak, but there is no sign of poison. My heart sank. Doctor, please look again. I am certain I was poisoned. Xue Tao shook his head. I've been a doctor for decades. I've treated countless poison victims. There is nothing in your system. If you truly are poisoned, then it is beyond my skill. You'll have to find a better doctor elsewhere. I left the clinic, feeling the weight of his words. I tried several other famous doctors that afternoon, and every single one of them said the same thing. No poison, only exhaustion. A dark realization washed over me. The 7-day heartbreaking pill wasn't a normal toxin. If mundane medicine couldn't even detect it, it was something far more sinister. If I wanted to survive, I couldn't find the answer on the streets. I had to find it from within the heaven-shaking gang itself.